Vietnam wasn't just America's most controversial war. It created Hollywood's most haunting combat films. From jungle nightmares to political powder kegs, filmmakers risked careers and sanity capturing a conflict that tore the nation apart. Did you know one legendary director nearly died making his Vietnam epic? Another film killed 23 people during production? Let's count down the definitive 20 Vietnam War films that changed cinema forever. Number 20, Tigerland 2000. Joel Schumacher's gritty boot camp drama launched Colin Farrell from nobody to superstar overnight. Shot on 16mm film for just $10 million to create that documentary feel, Tigerland follows recruits in the final weeks of training before shipping to Vietnam. The film's genius? It never actually goes to Vietnam, focusing instead on the psychological breakdown happening right at home in Louisiana. Farrell's performance as rebellious Private Boz was completely improvised. Schumacher told him to throw away the script and just react naturally to the brutal training scenarios. The director actually hired real drill instructors who weren't told they were making a movie. They thought they were training actual soldiers, which explains why the fear in those recruits' eyes looks so genuine. Critics praised its raw authenticity, with Roger Ebert calling it one of the most realistic military films ever made. The cast lived like actual recruits during the 28-day shoot, sleeping in barracks, eating military rations, and enduring 4 a.m. wake-up calls. No makeup, no Hollywood treatment. What's crazy is, Fox buried this film, releasing it in only 5 theaters nationwide. Studio execs hated its anti-military message so much, they essentially killed it before release. Only years later did critics rediscover it as the film that introduced one of Hollywood's biggest stars and showed the Vietnam War started destroying young men before they even left American soil. Number 19, Go Tell the Spartans, 1978. The Vietnam War film that predicted America's failure years before it happened. Set in 1964, when most Americans couldn't even find Vietnam on a map, this forgotten gem stars Burt Lancaster as a cynical military advisor watching disaster unfold in slow motion. Made for just $2 million, it's the only Vietnam film actually shot during the war itself. Director Ted Post filmed in California, but created such convincing jungle sets that several Vietnam vets on the crew suffered panic attacks during filming. Lancaster, then 65, and suffering from heart problems, insisted on performing his own stunts, including a harrowing sequence where he carries a wounded soldier through knee-deep mud for over a mile. Critics initially dismissed it as too political, but it's now considered prophetic. Roger Ebert later called it the first film to truly understand why Vietnam was unwinnable. The title comes from the ancient Greek battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans faced certain death against overwhelming odds. A perfect metaphor for America's doomed mission. Number 18, The Boys in Company C, 1978. Before Stanley Kubrick made Full Metal Jacket, there was this raw, unflinching look at Marine recruits going from boot camp to combat hell. Director Sidney Furie shot in the Philippines with real Vietnam refugees as extras, creating a documentary-like intensity that still hits like a gut punch. Several scenes were so realistic that Filipino authorities temporarily shut down production, thinking they were filming actual executions. The film follows 5 Marines from basic training through their deployment, focusing on how young men are systematically stripped of humanity, then expected to make moral choices in combat. Stan Shaw delivers a heartbreaking performance as a promising athlete whose dreams are sacrificed to the war machine. The infamous soccer match sequence, where American troops are forced to play Vietnamese civilians, perfectly captures the absurdity of trying to win hearts and minds while simultaneously destroying a country. Critics compared it unfavorably to The Deer Hunter upon release, but directors like Oliver Stone and Catherine Bigelow now cite it as a major influence. Its boot camp sequences were so authentic that the U.S. Marine Corps temporarily banned the film from being shown on military bases, claiming it would hurt recruitment numbers. The cast endured actual Marine training before filming, leading to multiple injuries and one actor, Michael Lembeck, suffering a nervous breakdown on set. He later said, "We weren't actors playing Marines by the end. We were Marines who happened to be in a movie. The film's gritty realism inspired numerous Vietnam films that followed, making it the forgotten godfather of the genre. Number 17. Uncommon Valor, 1983. Gene Hackman leads a ragtag team of Vietnam vets back into the jungle to rescue POWs abandoned by their government. What sounds like a standard action flick actually began as a documentary about real fathers searching for their missing sons. Director Ted Kotcheff interviewed dozens of families of MIAs before reshaping their stories into this adrenaline-fueled mission film. The production sparked international incidents when the Thai government discovered they were filming anti-Vietnamese propaganda on their soil. Hackman personally negotiated with Thai officials to continue shooting, allegedly bribing officials with $50,000 of his own money. The film's explosive final act required so much firepower that the production became, briefly, the seventh largest military force in Southeast Asia. Critics were divided, with The Washington Post calling it technically impressive but morally bankrupt, while veterans groups praised its portrayal of abandoned POWs. The film tapped into a nationwide obsession with MIAs, grossing $30 million against a $15 million budget, despite opening against Return of the Jedi. Fred Ward, who played a PTSD-afflicted veteran, disappeared into the Philippine jungle for 3 days, during filming to find his character, returning dehydrated and delirious. The production employed actual Vietnam veterans as advisors, several of whom believed the film's mission was based on classified real operations. One advisor was so convinced POWs remained in captivity that he attempted to organize a real rescue mission with cast members after filming wrapped. The studio had to issue public statements, clarifying the film was fiction after dozens of veterans volunteered for this unauthorized rescue attempt. Number 16. Heaven and Earth, 1993. Oliver Stone completed his Vietnam trilogy with the war's most overlooked masterpiece, the only major American film told entirely from a Vietnamese perspective. Based on Lee Lai Hayslip's memoirs, it follows a Vietnamese woman from childhood through war, showing the conflict through eyes rarely seen in Hollywood. Stone spent $33 million bringing this story to screen, only to watch it become the biggest box office disaster of his career. The production nearly killed actress Heep Thi Lee, who was found unconscious from heat exhaustion 3 times during the grueling Philippine shoot. Despite having no acting experience, Lee delivered a performance Roger Ebert called one of the most remarkable debuts in cinema history. Born in Da Nang during the war, she escaped Vietnam by boat at age 9 and was working as a waitress when Stone discovered her. The film's authentic portrayal of Vietnamese village life required importing 41 tons of rice plants, rebuilding entire villages, and hiring over 5,000 Vietnamese refugees as extras. Many suffered emotional breakdowns during realistic war sequences. One scene depicting a Viet Cong execution had to be stopped when several extras, who had witnessed similar killings, began screaming uncontrollably. Number 15. The Green Berets, 1968. John Wayne's controversial pro-war propaganda film is either patriotic masterpiece or delusional fantasy, depending on your politics. Released at the height of anti-war protests, it portrays the conflict as a straightforward fight against communism. The Duke personally financed part of the $7 million budget after Hollywood studios feared backing such a divisive project during national unrest. President Lyndon Johnson personally approved the script and granted Wayne unprecedented access to military equipment, making it the only Vietnam film made with full Pentagon cooperation during the actual war. The filming at Fort Benning used so many resources that military officials later admitted it delayed actual combat operations in Vietnam. Critics savaged it, with Renata Adler famously writing in the New York Times that it was vile and insane, while protesters picketed theaters nationwide. Despite the backlash, it became the 11th highest-grossing film of 1968, proving many Americans still supported the war effort. The production's most bizarre aspect? It was filmed entirely in Georgia swampland, with palm trees imported from Florida to create jungle authenticity. The most infamous blunder comes in the final scene, where Wayne and a Vietnamese orphan walk along a beach as the sun sets. In the east, Geography didn't matter much to Wayne, who was diagnosed with lung cancer during filming but refused to delay production. When criticized for the film's factual inaccuracies, Wayne reportedly said, "I don't make movies about Vietnam. I make movies about America." Despite its propaganda elements, film historians now consider it a fascinating time capsule, showing how desperately the military wanted to control the Vietnam narrative as public opinion turned against the war. Number 14. Coming Home, 1978. Jane Fonda and Jon Voight created the definitive homecoming drama about a paralyzed Vietnam vet and the wife of a Marine who find love amid national turmoil. Directed by Hal Ashby, this groundbreaking film was the first to focus entirely on the war's psychological aftermath, rather than combat itself. United Artists nearly canceled the production when executives discovered its progressive politics, but relented after Fonda threatened to expose their censorship attempts. The film broke cinematic taboos with its portrayal of disabled sexuality, featuring the first explicit sex scene involving a paralyzed character in mainstream American cinema. Voight spent months in VA hospitals, learning from paralyzed veterans, becoming so immersed he temporarily lost feeling in his legs through psychosomatic paralysis. His performance won him an Oscar and changed public perceptions of disabled veterans. Critics praised its emotional power, with the film winning 3 Academy Awards despite conservative backlash against Fonda's anti-war activism. The American Legion organized protests at theaters nationwide, calling it communist propaganda disguised as art. Director Hal Ashby fought the studio to cast actual disabled veterans instead of actors, eventually winning the battle and filling the VA hospital scenes with real veterans telling their unscripted stories directly to camera. Many were speaking about their experiences for the first time, making these scenes documentaries within the fiction. The production triggered PTSD episodes among several veteran participants, leading Fonda to establish one of the first counseling programs specifically for Vietnam veterans. Decades later, the VA still uses Coming Home in therapeutic settings, making it that rare Hollywood film that actually helped heal the wounds it portrayed. Number 13. Rescue Dawn, 2006. Werner Herzog's harrowing survival thriller stars Christian Bale as real-life Navy pilot Dieter Dengler, shot down over Laos and subjected to unimaginable torture before orchestrating an impossible escape. Herzog shot chronologically in the Thai jungle, where conditions were so brutal that 3 crew members were hospitalized with tropical diseases. Bale lost 55 pounds during production, reaching dangerous levels of emaciation that concerned medical professionals on set. Herzog insisted on authenticity to a maniacal degree. The torture scenes used real methods documented in POW testimonies, with Bale subjected to actual insects, submersion, and physical stress. The director refused safety measures during river scenes, resulting in Bale nearly drowning twice. When asked about the dangers, Herzog simply stated, "The jungle is a testing ground for human dignity." Critics hailed it as one of the most realistic POW films ever made, with Roger Ebert calling it a testament to the human spirit, so awesome and uncompromising that it transcends the war genre. Despite critical acclaim, the film grossed just $7 million against a $10 million budget, becoming another great Vietnam film audiences largely ignored. The most disturbing aspect? The real Dieter Dengler visited the set shortly before his death and told Bale, "What you're going through is nothing compared to what we endured." The actor later revealed this comment haunted him, driving him to push his body to even more dangerous extremes. The insects crawling over prisoners were not special effects. Herzog collected them from the jungle each morning. Steve Zahn, who played a fellow POW, developed lasting psychological issues from the shoot, later saying, "Part of me never left that jungle. I still have nightmares about being trapped there." Number 12. Hamburger Hill, 1987. The most realistic, brutal, and overlooked Vietnam combat film focuses on a single battle for a meaningless hill where over 70% of American forces became casualties. Director John Irvin cast unknowns like Don Cheadle and Dylan McDermott to maintain realism, putting them through actual military training so grueling that 2 actors quit before filming began. The title comes from Soldier's Gallows humor. The battle put so many men through the meat grinder that the hill became Hamburger Hill. The production generated controversy when the Philippine military provided actual battle footage of anti-insurgent operations, including real deaths, which Irvin incorporated into the film without informing the studio. When Paramount executives discovered this, they demanded the footage be removed, but some reportedly remains in the final cut, making it one of the only fiction films containing actual combat deaths. Critics praised its unrelenting realism, but audiences largely stayed away, with Vietnam fatigue setting in after Platoon and Full Metal Jacket. Military historians, however, consider it the most tactically accurate Vietnam film ever made, with West Point still using scenes for infantry training. The film's most harrowing achievement is its recreation of monsoon conditions on the hill. The production pumped over 500,000 gallons of water and 100 tons of mud onto the set daily, creating miserable conditions that cause multiple injuries and infections among the cast. The actors' visible exhaustion and 1,000-yard stares aren't acting. They're the result of working 20-hour days in dangerous conditions. Don Cheadle later said, "By the end, we weren't pretending to be soldiers anymore. We were actually fighting to survive that shoot." Veterans of the actual battle have called it eerily accurate, with one saying, "Watching it was like being sent back to that hill. I had to leave the theater." Number 11. The Killing Fields, 1984. Roland Joffé's devastating masterpiece follows New York Times journalist Sidney Schonberg and his Cambodian colleague Dith Pran as they document the Khmer Rouge's rise to power and subsequent genocide. The film's most remarkable aspect? It stars actual genocide survivor Dr. Hang S. Ngor, who had never acted before, but delivered an Oscar-winning performance based on his own trauma. Warner Brothers initially rejected him for being too authentic and triggering emotional breakdowns during auditions. The production became notorious for psychological damage inflicted on cast and crew. Filming in Thailand near the Cambodian border, with thousands of refugee extras who had survived actual atrocities, created an atmosphere of collective PTSD. Multiple scenes triggered flashbacks so severe that filming was repeatedly halted for psychological intervention. Ngor himself collapsed during the torture sequences, later explaining, "I was not acting, I was feeling my past." Critics hailed it as a masterpiece, with the film winning 3 Academy Awards and grossing $34 million against a $14 million budget. Its unflinching portrayal of American abandonment of Cambodia generated political controversy, with State Department officials attempting to discredit the film's historical accuracy. The movie's most horrifying aspect is that it actually toned down the real atrocities. Joffé later revealed that Warner Brothers removed several historically accurate scenes depicting Khmer Rouge brutality, fearing audiences couldn't handle the truth. The film's famous buried neck-deep execution scene shows only a fraction of what actually occurred. Ngor's life ended tragically when he was murdered in 1996 outside his Los Angeles apartment. Reportedly by gang members targeting the Oscar statue, he refused to surrender. A final brutal irony for a man who survived genocide only to be killed in America for a symbol of his performance about surviving genocide. Number 10. First Blood, 1982. Before Rambo became a cartoon superhero, First Blood delivered the definitive portrayal of a traumatized Vietnam veteran pushed too far by an uncaring society. Sylvester Stallone's performance as John Rambo, a Medal of Honor recipient hunted like an animal in small-town America, permanently changed how cinema portrayed veterans. The film's original cut ran 3.5 hours and ended with Rambo committing suicide. Test audiences were so disturbed that Orion Pictures demanded a complete reshoot of the final act. The production was plagued by injuries. Stallone performed his own stunts, including an 80-foot cliff jump that resulted in broken ribs. The famous scene where Rambo stitches his own arm used actual thread through a prosthetic covering Stallone's real arm, causing an infection that temporarily halted production. Canadian environmentalists protested the film after learning the production dynamited parts of the forest for action sequences. Critics initially dismissed it as exploitation, missing its powerful commentary on veteran neglect. It grossed $125 million against a $14 million budget, launching a franchise that ironically betrayed the original film's anti-war message. Real veterans groups praised its portrayal of PTSD decades before the condition was widely recognized. Brian Dennehy, who played the sheriff, later revealed that numerous Vietnam veterans approached him to share how accurately the film captured their homecoming experiences. The film's most haunting sequence, Rambo's breakdown where he describes watching his friend die, was improvised by Stallone after spending time interviewing veterans at VA hospitals. Director Ted Kotcheff fought studio demands to minimize the PTSD elements, insisting, "This isn't an action film. It's a tragedy about what war does to the men we send to fight it." The movie's subtle power comes from never showing Vietnam itself, instead focusing on how the war continued destroying lives long after soldiers returned home. Number 9. We Were Soldiers, 2002. Mel Gibson stars in the most tactically accurate Vietnam combat film ever made, depicting the first major battle between American forces and the North Vietnamese Army. Based on Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore's memoir, it's the rare Vietnam film that portrays both sides with respect and complexity. Director Randall Wallace spent $75 million recreating the brutal 1965 Battle of Ia Drang, with military historians calling the resulting combat scenes indistinguishable from documentary footage. The production employed over 500 military technical advisors, including veterans of the actual battle. Gibson trained with the real Hal Moore, then 79, who put the actor through punishing physical drills to understand the burdens of command. The landing zone scenes were so realistic that several veteran advisors suffered flashbacks, with one requiring hospitalization after collapsing on set. Critics praised its apolitical approach to depicting combat reality, with Roger Ebert calling it a film about courage and sacrifice made with real courage and sacrifice. It grossed $115 million worldwide, despite opening after 9/11, when American audiences were hesitant about war films. What separates this film from other Vietnam movies is its unflinching portrayal of the home front. The scenes showing taxi drivers delivering death telegrams to military wives created renewed awareness about the cruel notification system used during Vietnam. The real wives of fallen soldiers served as extras in these devastating sequences, reliving their worst moments on camera. Greg Kinnear later revealed that his character, helicopter pilot, Major Bruce Crandall, was present during his scenes, often correcting details between takes. The film's greatest achievement may be its Vietnamese perspective sequences, showing equal heroism and tactical brilliance from NVA commanders. A balanced portrayal that angered some conservative commentators but earned praise from military historians on both sides. Number 8. Casualties of War, 1989. Brian De Palma's unflinching moral horror story follows Michael J. Fox as a soldier who refuses to participate when his squad kidnaps, rapes, and murders a Vietnamese civilian. Based on a true incident investigated by Daniel Lang for The New Yorker, the film shocked audiences with its portrayal of American war crimes. De Palma received death threats from veteran groups before filming even began, forcing the production to use false titles during location scouting. Sean Penn's terrifying performance as the squad leader required such psychological darkness that he isolated himself from the cast, living separately and refusing to speak to Fox off-camera. Their on-screen tension reflects real animosity that developed during the difficult 93-day shoot in Thailand, where temperatures regularly exceeded 110 degrees. Fox later revealed that Penn's method acting included whispering horrific threats before emotional scenes to generate authentic fear reactions. Critics praised its moral courage, though audiences largely avoided its uncomfortable truths, with the film grossing only $18 million against its $22 million budget. The New York Times called it the most morally complex Vietnam film ever made, while conservative commentators labeled it anti-American propaganda. The most disturbing aspect? The film actually toned down the real crime. Court records show the actual incident involved more perpetrators and even more gruesome details that De Palma considered too horrific for viewers. The real-life whistleblower, Robert Storby, served as technical advisor but left the production after suffering PTSD symptoms. The Vietnamese village scenes employed actual refugees who had fled the war, creating authenticity that bordered on exploitation. Several extras reportedly suffered emotional breakdowns during the raid sequences. The film's power comes from showing how war corrupts even good soldiers, with Fox's character ultimately complicit through his initial silence, a damning metaphor for America's collective moral failure in Vietnam. Number 7. Born on the 4th of July, 1989, Oliver Stone's second Vietnam film follows Ron Kovich's journey from patriotic Marine to paralyzed anti-war activist, with Tom Cruise delivering the most transformative performance of his career. Stone, himself a wounded Vietnam veteran, fought for a decade to make this film, finally securing a $17.8 million budget after the success of Platoon. The script required Cruise to portray Kovich over 20 years, from teenage athlete to embittered veteran to purpose-driven activist. The production's physical demands were extreme. Cruise spent months in a wheelchair, living with paralyzed veterans and developing such severe back problems from the unnatural posture that he still deals with chronic pain today. The VA hospital sequences were so authentic that several extras who were actual disabled veterans experienced emotional breakdowns, forcing production delays while they received psychological care. Critics hailed it as Cruise's finest work, earning him his first Oscar nomination and grossing $161 million worldwide. Veterans groups were divided, with the American Legion condemning its politics, while the Vietnam Veterans of America praised its accuracy about VA hospital conditions. Number 6. Good Morning, Vietnam, 1987. Robin Williams delivered his career-defining performance as real-life armed forces radio DJ Adrian Cronauer, whose irreverent broadcasts boosted troop morale while antagonizing military brass. Director Barry Levinson gave Williams unprecedented freedom to improvise, with roughly 35% of his radio broadcasts completely unscripted. Williams recorded 18 hours of manic DJ sessions, much of which remains unreleased. Military consultants on the film were stunned by how accurately Williams captured the chaotic energy of wartime radio, despite having never served. The production faced political challenges filming in Thailand, as the government initially refused permission for any Vietnam War movie. Producer Mark Johnson secured approval by emphasizing the film's comedic elements and hiring hundreds of local workers. Still, Thai officials monitored filming daily, shutting down any scenes they deemed politically sensitive. Critics praised Williams' volcanic performance, with the film grossing $124 million against a $13 million budget. While marketed as a comedy, audiences were blindsided by its increasingly dark second half, with The Washington Post noting, "It's the rare film that makes you laugh hysterically one moment and cry the next." Number 5. Platoon, 1986. Oliver Stone's semi-autobiographical masterpiece ripped the patriotic facade off the Vietnam War, showing the conflict through the eyes of a young soldier caught between two sergeants representing different moral responses to combat. Stone, who was wounded twice during his own Vietnam service, fought for 10 years to get the film made, with every major studio rejecting it as too controversial. He finally secured a modest $6 million budget and shot in the Philippine jungle under brutal conditions that mirrored actual combat. The production's notorious boot camp, led by military advisor Dale Dye, subjected actors to 2 weeks of actual field conditions before filming began. They slept in the jungle, ate military rations, and conducted night patrols while Dye fired live ammunition over their heads. Willem Dafoe was bitten by a poisonous snake and nearly died before receiving anti-venom. Charlie Sheen later revealed he was so traumatized by the experience that he still has nightmares about it. The film's most powerful achievement was showing how the war created a civil war within the American forces themselves, with soldiers divided between following Sergeant Barnes's brutal pragmatism or Sergeant Elias's moral compass. The famous image of Dafoe's Christ-like death pose became an iconic symbol of sacrifice. Stone's masterstroke was focusing not on politics, but on the grunt-level experience, showing how strategic ambiguity and moral compromise corrupted the mission from within. Johnny Depp, then unknown, appears briefly as a translator, his first film role. His character's death scene was cut after test audiences found it too disturbing, with Stone later saying, Even in a film about the horrors of war, there's a line audiences won't cross. Number 4. The Deer Hunter, 1978. Michael Cimino's epic psychological drama follows Pennsylvania steelworkers who enlist together, experience the horrors of Vietnam, and return irrevocably changed. The film's Russian roulette sequences created such controversy that the Vietnamese government condemned it as distorted and reactionary. Despite never showing a single major battle, its intimate portrayal of psychological devastation made it perhaps the most emotionally impactful Vietnam film ever made. The production nearly destroyed its stars. Robert De Niro insisted on using a real bullet in his Russian roulette scenes with safety measures, causing Christopher Walken to develop genuine terror visible on screen. Walken lost 28 pounds during filming and later said, "Something in me broke making that film. I've never been the same." Meryl Streep took the role after her partner John Cazale was diagnosed with terminal cancer, with the studio initially trying to fire him until Streep and De Niro threatened to quit. Critics recognized its brilliance immediately, with the film winning 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Its unflinching look at veteran trauma grossed $49 million against a $15 million budget, proving audiences would embrace difficult war truths when wrapped in human drama. Number 3. Full Metal Jacket, 1987. Stanley Kubrick's clinical examination of how the military systematically dehumanizes young men before sending them to kill split critics and audiences with its fragmented structure. The first half, showing Marine boot camp under the terrifying drill instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, R. Lee Ermey, remains the most quoted and influential depiction of military training ever filmed. The second half, following Private Joker, Matthew Modine, as a military journalist in Vietnam, deliberately subverts combat film conventions to show the surreal moral vacuum of the conflict. The production's legendary perfectionism saw Kubrick shooting for 17 months, with a record 125 takes for single scenes. The entire Vietnam section was filmed in England, with Kubrick transforming an abandoned gasworks into war-torn hue by importing 200 Spanish palm trees and 100,000 plastic, tropical plants. Ermey, originally hired just as a technical advisor, won the role after showing Kubrick a self-made audition tape where he delivered non-stop profanity while being pelted with oranges and tennis balls, never flinching or breaking character. Critics initially seemed confused by the film's structural break, with some calling it 2 movies awkwardly joined. Audiences made it a hit anyway, grossing $46 million against a $30 million budget. It's now recognized as a masterpiece, with the boot camp sequence studied in film schools worldwide. The film's most shocking achievement is Vincent D'Onofrio's transformation into Private Pile. He gained 70 pounds for the role, setting a record for weight gain for a film that stood until Christian Bale broke it for The Machinist. The famous bathroom suicide scene was so realistic that a psychologist was kept on standby. Kubrick's obsessive attention to detail extended to researching the exact bullet trajectory for the scene, with special effects creating a precise brain matter spray pattern. The director's notorious control extended to the Vietnam sequences, where he created exact wind patterns for explosions by calibrating multiple industrial fans to match footage from actual combat. Modine later revealed that Kubrick prohibited cast members from watching actual Vietnam footage, saying, "I don't want you playing war, I want you being war." Number 2. Apocalypse, Now, 1979. Francis Ford. Coppola's hallucinatory journey into the heart of darkness nearly killed its director, bankrupted his studio, and drove its star, Martin Sheen, to a heart attack. What began as a 14-week shoot in the Philippines stretched to 238 days of pure chaos. Typhoons destroyed expensive sets. The Philippine government repeatedly reclaimed helicopters mid-shoot to fight actual rebels. Marlon Brando arrived 85 pounds overweight, having not read the script, forcing complete reconception of the film's climax. Coppola was so distraught, he threatened suicide multiple times, telling his wife, "I'm thinking of shooting myself." The production's infamous excesses included actual animal sacrifices, rampant drug use among cast and crew, and Martin Sheen's breakdown during the hotel room scene, where he genuinely punched a mirror, severely cutting his hand. The blood seen on screen is real. The 23-year-old Lawrence Fishburne lied about his age to get cast, meaning he was just 14 when filming began. The stress nearly destroyed Coppola, who mortgaged his house and vineyard to complete the film after going $20 million over budget. Critics were initially divided on what Pauline Kael called a messy, megalomaniacal anti-masterpiece, but audiences gradually embraced its madness, with the film grossing $150 million worldwide across multiple releases. It's now considered perhaps the greatest war film ever made, with the American Film Institute ranking it for 30 on their list of greatest American films. The film's most disturbing element remains the snail crawling along the edge of a straight razor atmosphere Coppola created by refusing to provide a shooting script. Most scenes were improvised that day, with actors never knowing what they'd be filming. Dennis Hopper was kept perpetually high on various substances to maintain his manic photojournalist character. The famous "I love the smell of napalm in the morning" sequence used actual explosives that nearly killed several stunt performers when winds shifted unexpectedly. When asked years later about the film's chaotic production, Coppola famously said, "My film is not about Vietnam. It is Vietnam." The documentary Hearts of Darkness, showing the production's insanity, remains almost as compelling as the film itself. Number 1. Da 5 Bloods, 2020. Spike Lee's blistering late-career masterpiece follows 4 Black Vietnam veterans returning to the jungle decades later to recover hidden gold and their squad leader's remains. It's a radical reinvention of the Vietnam movie, showing how Black soldiers fought America's war while their brothers fought for civil rights back home. Netflix provided Lee with a $35 million budget after traditional studios balked at financing a Black Vietnam narrative, considering it too niche despite the disproportionate number of Black soldiers who served. The production's most innovative choice was having 70-something actors play their younger selves in flashback sequences without de-aging technology, creating a powerful temporal collapse where past trauma literally inhabits present bodies. Delroy Lindo delivers perhaps the greatest performance in any Vietnam film as Paul, a MAGA hat wearing veteran consumed by guilt and rage. His extended monologue, delivered directly to camera while wandering alone in the jungle, left crew members in tears during filming. Critics hailed it as an instant classic, with the New York Times calling it a Vietnam film that finally gives Black soldiers their due. The pandemic prevented a theatrical release, but it became one of Netflix's most watched original films. It secured just 1 Oscar nomination, despite widespread critical consensus it deserved more, reviving discussions about Hollywood's ongoing diversity issues. The film's most powerful achievement is recontextualizing Vietnam within Black American history, with Marvin Gaye's music creating emotional continuity between battlefield and civil rights struggles. Lee's masterstroke was casting Chadwick Boseman as squad leader Stormin' Norman in what would be his final role before his untimely death, giving his scenes an unintended elegiac quality. The film's gold retrieval plot deliberately echoes The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, using greed as a mechanism to explore how America abandoned both Vietnam and its returning Black veterans. Lindo, who served in the military during Vietnam but wasn't deployed to the conflict, called the role the most difficult and rewarding of my career. The film's unforgettable landmine sequence prompted nationwide discussions about the 300,000-plus unexploded ordnance still killing Vietnamese civilians today, making it that rare Hollywood film that created tangible real-world impact. From psychological horror to surreal jungle odysseys, these films capture a conflict that defined a generation. Which Vietnam War movie do you think should have made the list? Did Apocalypse Now deserve the top spot, or are smaller films like Tigerland criminally underrated? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Here's the real question. Has Hollywood glorified Vietnam combat while neglecting the stories of Vietnamese civilians who lost everything? Or are these films vital reminders of a war America keeps trying to forget?